Hi everyone, welcome back to Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Today's video is my wrap up for the month of October, and although it was Victober, I may have epically failed to read very much Victorian literature. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name's Alice and I have way too many books, and in spite of those way too many books, I don't feel like October was the best of reading months, giant TBR wise, and also October TBR wise, because I put out two TBR videos, one for possibilities for Victober and one for everything else, and I don't feel like I've achieved very much from those. I haven't dared to look back at them, but yeah, I just don't feel like I read what I planned to read, but that can happen. And although I say I feel like it's not been a good reading month, I think that that's me being hard on myself, because I didn't read many Victorian books and I didn't read what I would consider enough from the giant TBR, but more on that later, because I will be updating you on the giant TBR numbers at the end of the video, as I always do in these wrap-ups. And I'm going to start before the stats with which books I have started but not finished this month. So first of all, there are no audiobooks to talk about this month, and that's because I have been continuing to listen to Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. This is a buddy read with the lovely Gemma from GemofBooks and the lovely Jack from Spread Book Joy, and we've been reading the entire First Law trilogy on audio, and we've not yet finished Last Argument of Kings. I think we've got about 8 hours to go. It is a very long audiobook. So that's continuing on into November, as is my new Hercule Poirot book that I received during the month from Tandem Collective. This one is an ad PR product, and I've been joining in with a read along over on Instagram, but I've not finished, even though the read along kind of has finished. So yeah, I've been a bit slow with this one, but this is Hercule Poirot's Silent Night by Sophie Hannah, and I'm going to be carrying that on into November. Hopefully this will be the next book that I finish. Now, here's confession time. I have not got very far with my two main Victorian reads that I really wanted to read in Victober, which I am sad about, especially this one, because this one was a buddy read with Nikki from Red Dot Reads, and Nikki has finished the book. I have not finished the book. In fact, I'm only on chapter 4, and I feel really bad about that, but also equally I just haven't had the time to dedicate to this book to get properly into it yet. But yes, definitely looking forward to getting stuck into the rest of this in November. The other one that has fallen by the wayside, and I feel a bit bad about this, but at least I was just reading this on my own, was Dombey and Son, and this happened to Dombey and Son last Victober. I've got further than I did last Victober because I'm nearly up to chapter 4. I'm partway through chapter 3. I just think this one's going to take a little bit longer, and mainly it's been overlooked because I've had lots of other things on the go. Same excuses as last Victober, but I am very much looking forward to getting on with Dombey and Son, and I will hope to finish this one, let's say by the end of the year, to give me that motivation. Stats wise, I read 10 books in the month of October. According to Storygraph, that is a grand total of 3,098 pages, which is not as much as usual. All my books were physical books this month. I didn't read any ebooks and I didn't finish any audiobooks. Of those physical books, 3 of them were borrowed. 2 I think were from the library and 1 was borrowed from my mum. 2 books were rereads, which I'm really excited to talk about. And 5 books were from the giant TBR. Not as much sticking to the giant TBR reads as I had hoped, but yeah, I don't think it's too bad. A lot of the books this month did seem to be books that I had started in previous months and finished off this month. So I don't know if that means I actually read even less than Storygraph is saying. As I always do in my wrap-ups, I'm going to talk about the books roughly in order from my least favourite of the month to my most favourite. I'm going to start off with Agatha Christie being bottom of the pile again, unfortunately. So this is one of the books that Agatha Christie wrote under a pseudonym, and if you watched my holiday vlog you will have seen this one. It came to Mallorca with me in September and got photographed and filmed a lot, but didn't get finished on that holiday. So I finished this one in October, and this is probably the most disappointed I've been by a Mary Westmacott so far. I mean, I never find the Mary Westmacott books as gripping as like a Poirot or a Miss Marple, but I do appreciate them for what they are, but this one, not so much. The basic premise of this book is it's about a woman called Joan who has gone out to Iraq to visit her daughter who has been ill, and she ends up stuck in the desert in an isolated rest house because the trains can't go and there's no trains for a couple of days. It's a very, very introspective book about Joan. This is mostly following Joan's thoughts for the duration of about 3 days, and yeah, boy are her thoughts repetitive. So Joan thinks a lot about her husband and things that have happened with her husband. Being alone in the desert and having finished her books, Joan basically has way too much thinking time, and I just didn't really enjoy this. I mean, Agatha Christie is quoted on the back as having said, "The one book that has satisfied me completely, the book I always wanted to write." But it didn't really do anything for me, unfortunately. I'm sure that there are people out there who would really appreciate this and really enjoy it, especially if you like a book that is mainly about a character's thoughts. And I wasn't satisfied by the ending of this either. I feel like I could have really enjoyed it if a certain thing had happened at the end, but quite the opposite happened. So not a favourite, undoubtedly my least favourite of the Mary Westmacott so far, and I think I have got 2 more to read, so that was a shame. Next up, I read the final book in the Aurora Teagarden series. This was a library book and it was Sleep Like a Baby by Charlaine Harris. I have been reading all of the Charlaine Harris Aurora Teagarden mystery books this year, and I've been reading them with a lovely group of people, and the group is run by Amy from Booktube with Amy and Ange from Ange's Book Chatter. Definitely check both of those out. I will link them in the description down below. This series has been hit and miss for me, definitely. It has finished up most of the wrap-ups as the first book talked about, so in least favourite position. This one was okay. Charlaine Harris wrote like the last couple of these books quite a few years after the main bulk of the series, and yeah, being the 10th book, we're already familiar with Aurora Teagarden. I'm not going to give spoilers for this because they would spoiler other books in the series, but basically there ended up being a dead body in Aurora Teagarden's garden. This has happened before in the series. She kind of investigates it, and to be honest, I can't remember a lot of this already. It seems to have gone. So yeah, it was fine. It was a mystery. I did think that some of the mystery elements were well done, and I did think that Charlaine Harris's writing was much better in this than in some of the earlier books in the series. And I didn't hate Aurora as a character as we came to the end of the series. I actually ended up feeling like I would miss this series, even though I have at times found it to be not that great, but I have really enjoyed reading it with that lovely group of people. And next up, I talked about this book in my end of the year book tag, and that inspired me to actually get back to it and finish it. So tick, I have read the book that I said I must read by the end of the year, and that is To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. Now, when I started this book back in January, I was struggling with it because it is very much a stream of consciousness type writing. I hadn't read Virginia Woolf before, so I wasn't aware that that was her style of writing. Going into this, I had no real idea of what to expect, and I, to be honest, thought it's quite a short book. I'll be able to finish that quite easily, and then I didn't. I had been told that like exciting stuff happens in part 2 of this. I found part 1 quite dragging and long, and mainly in this book we're introduced to the Ramsay family who are visiting the Isle of Skye, and they want, or some of the family want to go to the lighthouse. Others in the family keep putting off going to the lighthouse. And we hear lots of their thoughts. My problem with part one was mainly that not only was it a stream of consciousness, but it jumped around into whose consciousness it was. And sometimes I found that quite hard to follow. So part two, without spoiling this book, I do think that this book is worth reading for part two, because part two, which is called Time Passes, was a very short part and it's completely different. So it's like lots of sort of nature writing, and Time Passes is a perfect name for this part because it really does show us the passing of time and how nature and things go on without us as humans, and some of the main events of the story, without spoiling it, happen in the background of part two, which was a really interesting strategy to me. It's definitely something new and different, and I appreciated Virginia Woolf for that. So I haven't put this any lower in my rankings for the month, because although I didn't particularly enjoy it, I definitely didn't love part one. I thought part two was absolutely excellent. If I was rating this book just on part two, I think that I would rate it much higher. In part three, we kind of get the conclusion to the Ramses story, and that was okay as well. Basically, every part of this I liked more than I liked part one, but part two was definitely a favourite. A really, really good piece of writing. I can see from part two why people appreciate Virginia Woolf, but I'm still really not sure that Virginia Woolf is for me. I have been told that Mrs. Dalloway is much more easily accessible than this book, so I may still try Mrs. Dalloway, but any advice would be appreciated. I think I will give a rest to Virginia Woolf for a while to see if I can come back to Mrs. Dalloway at some point and appreciate it more. So next up, a book I borrowed from the library on a whim, which I shouldn't have done, but I did, and I read it really quickly. Really enjoyed this one, very fast paced, and that was The Agathas by Kathleen Glasgow and Liz Lawson. And this is a YA mystery book, and I must say that this is my favourite YA mystery book that I've read so far. This one really knocked it out of the park for me, and that was because there's a lot of references to Agatha Christie in here, some of them more Easter eggish and hidden than others that people who've read Agatha Christie would appreciate, and others is just, there's two main characters in this book and one of them is a massive fan of Agatha Christie, so she uses her Agatha Christie knowledge to help her try to solve this case that's happened, which is that one of her friends has gone missing. I found both of the two main characters compelling. They both had interesting backstories and things going on in their lives that weren't necessarily directly related to the mystery. Although this was quite chunky, I did think that it was well done, an easy read, and I really, really appreciated this much more than I thought I might. It was just enjoyable, brain candy, lots of references to Agatha Christie, and if you are a fan of Agatha Christie and you haven't tried any sort of YA mysteries, I do think that this might be a book for you. And if you like YA mysteries and you haven't read this one yet, I would highly, highly recommend it. I think there is a sequel to this. I'm not rushing out to get it because I do need to read what's on my shelves, but I think I will hope to borrow the sequel from the library at some point in the future. Next up, we have Big Sky by Kate Atkinson. Now this is on my giant TBR, but I have lent it to my mum, and I say lent it. It seems that I had put this on my giant TBR and that it's possible that my mum had actually only lent it to me, not fully given it to me, but I maintain that she gave it to me. But anyway, whatever reason, my mum wanted it back, so it's gone back to my mum's. This was the 5th book in the Jackson Brodie series. I also buddy read this with Nikki from Red Dot Reads. I'll leave a link to her channel in the description. It's very, very good. I didn't enjoy this as much as the other Jackson Brodie books I've read, which were the first two, and I think this is my own fault. And the reason why I think this is my own fault is because I do like reading series in order. And I didn't think when I picked this one up that it would necessarily matter that I hadn't read books 3 and 4, but there was quite a lot of content in this where I could tell that it followed on from other things that have happened to Jackson Brodie, the main detective, and I now didn't understand it because I hadn't read books 3 and 4. So a bit annoyed with myself on that. I think that Nikki and I might revisit the series, reread the first 2 and then read 3 and 4 afresh at some point, maybe next year. I do always love Kate Atkinson's style. I'm not saying I didn't enjoy this book, because I did. I just think I would have appreciated it that much more if I'd have understood Jackson Brodie's relationships and things that were going on. I finished this book off, it was left over from September, so I can't honestly remember all of the finer details of it because I read it quite some time ago, it seems. There's lots of different perspectives in this, maybe too many, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. I think it is a good book, and some of those characters I really enjoyed reading about, and I think Kate Atkinson's style in these books is very British. I think there was lots and lots of reference to English places and products and things like that. Also a lot of probably quite British humour, but yeah, I do always appreciate Kate Atkinson's writing. I've never come across a Kate Atkinson book that I didn't like. Probably would have ended up higher up if I'd have read the series in order. Next, we are into the really good books now that I really very much enjoyed, and we have The Day It Rained Forever by Ray Bradbury. This was a Ray Bradbury short story collection that I was sent by the wonderful Jack from Spread Book Joy, who sent me this for my birthday, and I really appreciated that. I read this with Mitzi from Mitzi Reads and Writes and Art from Art's Bookshelf Odyssey, and I really enjoy reading Ray Bradbury. I really enjoy reading Ray Bradbury with Art and Mitzi, because Art has a lot of experience of Bradbury and has read lots of the things before, and Mitzi, like me, is coming to it for the first time, so it's a great little Bradbury group. I very much enjoyed it. So this had quite a lot of stories in it, and I would say that this one was more of a mixed bag than the other Ray Bradbury short story collections I've read. I think that in the Martian Chronicles, which is interconnected short stories, I just thought all the stories were really good. And in The Illustrated Man, I don't think there was a weak story in the book. In the crime one that I read more recently, Killer Come Back to Me, I thought the stories weren't perhaps as good as Ray Bradbury's sci-fi stories, but I still very much enjoyed it. This one had a mixture of very short stories and some stories that were a bit longer. I was more able to get my teeth into. So some of my favourites in this would be The Town Where No One Got Off, which I'd actually already read in the crime one. I think that's a great short story by Bradbury. I also really enjoyed a new to me story called Referent that was quite sci-fi-ish. A Chance to Dream I thought was an excellent story with a great kicker at the end, like Bradbury sometimes does. The Time of Going Away was just a beautiful and excellent story. The others I enjoyed, but maybe not as much as I've enjoyed other Ray Bradbury stories. And there was a couple in here that I just felt like I didn't quite get them. I don't quite know what Bradbury was getting at with them, but there was a lot of short stories in here, so I don't see that as a problem. I still thought it was excellent overall. I always loved Bradbury's writing style. There was lots of water imagery in this collection, so I think The Day It Rained Forever was a great title for it, and I love water imagery in short stories, so that really worked for me as well. I would recommend it to fans of Ray Bradbury. Very fun short story reading in that one, and again that was carried over from September too. Next up we have the one and only Victorian book that I finished in the month of Victober, and that was The Diary of a Nobody by George and Weedon Grossmith. This was on my 23 classics to read in 2023, and I really I'm glad that I read this. I have also read this year, in terms of this sort of genre of Victorian book, which I would classify as kind of Victorian humour. I found the other one that I read this year, which was Three Men in a Boat, much funnier. I was expecting this to be funny, and it didn't really make me laugh out loud that much. I think there was one point where I did laugh out loud, and the rest of the time it just made me smile. It was a fun Victorian book, easy to read. If you are looking for a way into Victorian literature, I would say that this diary style book is a very, very fun sort of portrait of life in Victorian times for a non-important, nondescript sort of man and his family, and the sort of little scrapes that he gets himself into. Very, very enjoyable. It had some pictures as well, which I also appreciated. I think they were by Weed and Grossmith, and George did most of the writing as far as I can tell. Highly recommend this Victorian book, especially if you like diary style narratives, which I love. Not maybe as great as I thought it might be, but still an excellent read this month. This is where we get to my favourites of the month. They're all 5 stars in this category. I can't separate them because 2 of them were part of a reread that I was doing of my absolute favourite series of all time, I would say. And the other one is actually a contender for my best book of the year. Yeah, Demon has a challenger, and I'm still not sure at the end of the month whether Demon is going to be my favourite of the year or whether this book is going to be my favourite book of the year. But I am going to talk about it first because I want to talk about the 2 rereads second. This was a pleasant surprise to me, and this book is doing almost everything that I love in fiction, and that's The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. I can see this becoming like a favourite of all time because I just thought it was so good. This was the book for FOMO Book Club for the months of September and October, and I just appreciated this one so much. I'm so glad we read this. I was correct to fear missing out on it because it's brilliant. There will be, of course, a live show about this one, and I actually think that it's going to be taking place possibly even on the same day this video will come out. If this video comes out first, our live show is going to be on Sunday the 5th of November over on Jack's channel at 6 PM UK time. That is where I'm going to talk about most of my thoughts on The 13th Tale with spoilers, so do come along if you've read the book at any point and if you'd like to hear our discussion. FOMO Book Club, if I haven't said, is the reading club that I run with Jack from Spread Book Joy and Gemma from GemofBooks. This is about Margaret Lee, and the first thing that I love about this is that Margaret works in a bookshop in the beginning, and many of the things I'm about to say about this book are absolute catnip to me in terms of books. So there's bookshop action, there's parts of this that are told in first person from the point of view of Margaret, and there's also the story within a story that is being told to Margaret, because Margaret receives a letter at the beginning from a famous author. So again, a brilliant thing that I love in books is authors being main characters, and Margaret is probably going to become an author because the author wants her to write her life story, and she's never spoken about this before. In that part where she's telling her story, we get sort of spooky house vibes, a very strange family situation basically. And also twins is a theme in this book. I love that theme as well. So basically this book was, I've actually said to some people that this book for me was practically perfect in every way. It just kept me absolutely hooked and gripped to the very final pages. Loved this, really pleased that I read this, and it was an absolute favourite of the month, possibly even my top favourite of the year. It's just a question of whether it's going to be top or second, and yeah, I think it does a lot of things for me that maybe Demon Copperhead didn't do for me, so yeah, we have a contender at last. Finally, we have come to my last 2 reads of the month that were rereads. This reread was actually, started out as a buddy read. I read the first 3 books in the months of August and September, and I've already wrapped those up therefore. And these are the final two books of the Dark is Rising sequence by Susan Cooper, and I was reading these with Gemma from GemofBooks and Jack from Spread Book Joy. However, I have gone on ahead because of a special reason. So I wanted to finish both of these two this month because I had booked tickets to an event at the British Library to see Susan Cooper in conversation with Natalie Haynes, and I went with my mum, and it was just the best night. It was so good, such a good bookish event. So Natalie Haynes was interviewing Susan Cooper, who is now 88 years old, and she was wonderful. I feel like Natalie Haynes asked all of the questions that I, as also a big fan of The Dark is Rising, and she was obviously a big fan of it too. Susan Cooper was just wonderful. I thought her answers were so interesting. It was just a fantastic night all round, and at the end of the night Susan Cooper did sign my copy of Oversea Under Stone, which I had a hard job selecting, but yeah, she has signed that for me. It was such an honour to meet such a clever writer, and a writer who has been a favourite for years since childhood. And it was wonderful to go to it with my mum as well, because my mum initially read us these books, and she took her very old copy of The Dark is Rising to get it signed. And I'm going to put a picture on the screen of the old editions compared to the new editions that I got in recent years so that I could reread it again. That was just incredible, and these books are incredible too. The Grey King is the fourth book in the series, and Silver on the Tree is the fifth, and I don't think either of these are still my favourite in the series, but they are a wonderful conclusion to this. Both are in large part set in Wales, in the mountains of Wales, and I just love these. I'm going to be talking about these further in a reader's guide to this series. I couldn't pick between these two, although I think I probably love this conclusion to the series slightly more than The Grey King. They just have such fond memories for me of them being read to me. This was my second reread as an adult, and they're still just as good. And this is a fantasy series that uses like English myths and legends, and Welsh myths and legends, Cornish myths and legends and traditions, wonderful UK set books, and just a fantasy series I don't hear people talk about enough. So it was so wonderful to go to this event at the British Library, which was opening the exhibition that they have at the moment of which is all about fantasy. So I will link their website in the description down below so you can see about the fantasy exhibition that's on at the moment. Susan Cooper is an absolute legend and a genius, and these were amazing. So more on these to come, definitely on my channel. I feel like I've been going on about these ever since I started my channel, because they are just the book series I think is the most underrated, that I love so much. And it's 50 years since The Dark is Rising itself was published this year, so what a way to celebrate by getting to see Susan Cooper. That's the end of the wrap up for this month. All that remains is to update you on the state of the giant TBR numbers, and at the end of September I had 161 books left on the giant TBR. I gained this month my book from Mr. B's, which was this one, and that brought us up to 162 books. I also hauled 2 more books, which is in the video you will have seen this week, so that took us up to 164 books. I read a total of 5 books from the giant TBR, and those were Big Sky, Absent in the Spring, The Diary of a Nobody, The 13th Tale, and The Day It Rained Forever. And that brings us down to 159 books, so we're in the 150s. this is not a drill. My massive goal for the year was to get below 150. I'm not sure if I will do it in November because that's 9 books to read, and I can't guarantee I won't be reading a couple of library books because I do have a few out, but we are getting ever closer and I am excited about that. Thank you very much for watching today. My wrap up for the month of October and Victober. Lots to carry on with, as you can see. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What were your favourite books of the month? Have you read any of these ones? Did you participate in Victober? Let me know all of those things in the comments. If you have enjoyed this video today, I'd love it if you would give it a like and consider subscribing if you haven't already. And I will hope very much to see you all again very soon for another video all about books here on Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Bye for now.